I never thought shoveling snow for my neighbors would lead to a full-blown war, but that's exactly what happened. It all started with a simple desire to be left alone, and ended with lawyers, public humiliation, and the complete dismantling of our neighborhood's little dictatorship. My name is Jack, and for 15 years, I've lived in a quiet corner of a subdivision called Willow Creek. It was the kind of place you move to when you're tired of noise and drama. The houses aren't huge, but they have decent-sized yards, and the folks who live here have always been the type to give you a friendly wave and then mind their own business. It was a perfect balance of community and privacy. I run a small-scale excavation and landscaping business. It's mostly just me, a reliable Ford F350, a heavy-duty trailer, and a couple of hard-working guys I trust with my equipment. We dig foundations for new builds, grade yards, install septic systems, and in the winter, we make our real money clearing snow from commercial lots. The work is hard, often dirty, and subject to the whims of the weather, but it's honest. There's a simple satisfaction that comes from transforming a patch of unruly earth into something clean and useful. It's tangible. You can stand back at the end of the day and see exactly what you've accomplished. I've always applied that same straightforward mentality to my life. Do good work, treat people fairly, and don't cause problems for anyone. In return, I expected the same. For a long time, Willow Creek delivered on that unspoken promise. Our homeowners association was, for most of its existence, a benign and largely invisible entity. We all paid our modest annual dues, and in exchange, a landscaping company would come by once a week in the summer to mow the small green space at the neighborhood entrance. That was it. The HOA board was a rotating cast of residents who mostly just wanted to make sure that one responsibility was handled. The meetings were famously short and poorly attended. There was no power to be had, no influence to peddle, so nobody with an ego ever bothered with it. We were a community governed by common sense and mutual respect, not a three-ring binder full of draconian rules. If your neighbor's lawn got a little long, you didn't file a complaint. You just figured they were busy and it would get handled eventually. It was a system that worked because we were neighbors, not subjects. That all changed about 2 years ago when Carol moved into the house at the end of the cul-de-sac. She was in her late 50s, with a helmet of perfectly coiffed blonde hair that seemed impervious to wind, and a perpetual expression that suggested she'd just smelled something unpleasant. We learned through the neighborhood grapevine that she was recently divorced and had moved from a much more affluent, gated community. She clearly missed the gates. From day one, she carried herself with an air of authority she hadn't earned. She saw our quiet, loosely run neighborhood not as a peaceful refuge, but as a fixer-upper project. A project only she had the vision to complete. She descended upon the HOA like a hawk on a field mouse. At her first meeting, attended by the usual 5 or 6 people, she announced her candidacy for president. No one else wanted the job, so she won by default. It was a bloodless coup, and most of us didn't even realize it had happened until the first new newsletter arrived in our mailboxes. It was printed on heavy, cream-colored cardstock and featured a professionally taken headshot of Carol, smiling a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The tone was chipper, but laced with an undercurrent of menace. Big changes were coming, she promised, to protect our property values and uphold community standards. The changes started small, like a slowly rising tide. First came the Architectural Review Committee, which she appointed herself to lead. Suddenly, the color you wanted to paint your front door required a formal application and a swatch sample. Then came the landscaping ordinances. Lawn height was now regulated to be between 2 and 4 inches. Holiday decorations had to be taken down within 10 days of the holiday, no exceptions. Mailboxes had to be a specific model, black, mounted on a 4x4 post painted a specific shade of white. Each new rule was a minor annoyance, a little prickle of irritation. People grumbled amongst themselves, but it always seemed easier to just comply than to pick a fight. Who wants to go to war over the color of their mailbox? So we painted our posts, measured our grass, and sighed. Carol's power grew with our apathy. She started conducting compliance walks every Saturday morning, striding through the neighborhood with a clipboard and a digital camera. She'd stop, squint at a house, make a note, and move on. It felt less like a neighbor taking a stroll and more like a warden inspecting a cell block. The first violation notices began to appear, taped to front doors. A trash can left out 2 hours past the designated time, a $25 fine. A child's bicycle left on the lawn overnight, a $50 fine. A small crack in a driveway, a warning, followed by a $100 fine if not repaired within 30 days. She was building her little empire one petty rule at a time, funded by the fines she levied against her own neighbors. The quiet, live and let live spirit of Willow Creek was dying, and none of us seemed to know how to stop it. We were all just hoping her gaze wouldn't fall on us. My turn, however, was coming, and it would be triggered by an act of God and a whole lot of snow. The winter had been relatively mild, but forecasters had been warning about this one for a week. They called it a generational storm, a snowpocalypse. It hit on a Thursday night, a furious blizzard that buried everything in a thick, heavy blanket of white. When I woke up Friday morning and looked out the window, I couldn't see the street. I couldn't see my truck. All I could see was a vast, undulating sea of snow, easily 3 feet deep, with drifts that piled up even higher against the houses. The world was silent, muffled, and completely paralyzed. The city announced that all non-emergency services were suspended. The plows would focus on major arteries and hospitals first. Our little subdivision was at the bottom of the list. We were on our own. For most people, this was a crisis. For me, it was just a big job. This was what my equipment was built for. I fired up my F-350, the diesel engine rumbling to life with a reassuring growl. The commercial-grade V-plow on the front was a serious piece of hardware, designed to move massive amounts of snow quickly. I spent the first hour clearing my own long driveway, pushing the heavy wet snow into enormous piles at the edges of my property. It was hard work, but satisfying. With my own space cleared, I was about to head inside for a well-deserved coffee when I looked across the street. Mr. Henderson's house was dark, and his driveway was an impassable wall of white. Mr. Henderson was in his early 80s, a widower who had lived in his house since it was built. He was a kind, gentle man who mostly kept to himself, but we'd bonded over the years, sharing vegetables from his garden in the summer and checking in on each other during power outages. I knew he had a heart condition and a pacemaker. The thought of him being trapped in there, unable to get out in an emergency, didn't sit right with me. So, without a second thought, I angled my plow and crossed the street. It took another 20 minutes, but soon his driveway and walkway were cleared down to the pavement. A light flicked on inside, and a few minutes later, he opened his front door and gave me a grateful, slightly shaky wave. That was all the thanks I needed. But as I was about to park my truck, my next-door neighbor, a young mother with 2 small kids, came trudging through the deep snow. "Jack, I saw what you did for Mr. Henderson," she said, her breath pluming in the frigid air. "That was amazing. I know it's a lot to ask, but my husband's a doctor. He's on call at the hospital, and there's no way he can get his car out. Is there any chance?" I just nodded. "Pull his car into the garage. I'll take care of it." One by one, others emerged. People were stuck. An elderly couple needed to get to a dialysis appointment the next day. A family was running low on baby formula. The problem wasn't just inconvenience, it was becoming a genuine safety issue. So I just kept going. I spent the next 8 hours methodically working my way through Willow Creek. I cleared the main road first, creating a single passable lane. Then I went back and cleared every single driveway, every single walkway, for all 47 houses in the subdivision. I used the big plow for the heavy lifting, and then came back with my skid steer, which has a powerful snowblower attachment, to clear the areas near mailboxes and fire hydrants without creating massive, obstructive piles. People came out with thermoses of hot chocolate and coffee. They offered me money, which I politely refused. This wasn't a job. This was just being a neighbor. By the time I was done, the sun was setting and my entire body ached, but our neighborhood was an island of accessibility in a sea of snow. We were safe. We were clear. I felt a deep sense of pride and community spirit that I hadn't felt in a long time. It was the Willow Creek I remembered. The next morning, I was sitting in my kitchen, nursing a cup of coffee and enjoying the profound stillness that follows a big snow. The sun was brilliant on the white landscape, and a sense of accomplishment warmed me more than the coffee. That's when the pounding started. It wasn't a polite knock. It was an aggressive, rhythmic banging on my front door that echoed through the house. I opened the door to find Carol standing on my freshly cleared porch. She wasn't dressed for the weather. She wore thin slacks and a blazer over a silk blouse, as if she refused to acknowledge the 3 feet of snow surrounding her. Her face was a thundercloud of pure rage. "What do you think you're doing?" she snapped, her voice sharp and accusatory. She didn't say hello. She didn't thank me for clearing her driveway, which I had also done. She just launched into her attack. I was so taken aback that for a moment I just stared at her. "I'm sorry?" I finally managed. "I was having a cup of coffee." Her eyes narrowed. "Don't be glib with me, Jack. You know exactly what I'm talking about." She pointed a trembling finger at my F-350, which was parked neatly in my driveway, the plow still attached. "That. You are operating a commercial enterprise from a residential property in direct violation of HOA covenants." I actually laughed, a short, incredulous bark. "Carol, are you serious? I just spent my entire day clearing this entire neighborhood, for free, because everyone was trapped. I was helping." Her expression didn't soften, it hardened. "You were not helping," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "You were performing a service using commercial-grade equipment, which is strictly forbidden. The HOA has an approved and insured vendor for snow removal services. You have interfered with that contract." I stared at her. "An approved vendor? Where are they, Carol? Did you see them out here yesterday? The entire neighborhood was snowed in. Mr. Henderson couldn't get out of his house." "Mr. Henderson's situation is not your concern," she shot back. "The proper procedure is to call the vendor, who would have arrived in the contractually obligated time frame." It was like arguing with a brick wall, a very self-righteous brick wall. I took a deep breath, trying to hold on to my patience. "Look, I did a good thing for our neighbors, that's all. The truck is my personal vehicle. The plow is attached to it because we're in the middle of a historic snowstorm and I use it for my job. I'm not running a business out of my driveway." She pulled a folded piece of paper from her blazer pocket and shoved it at my chest. I unfolded it. It was an official HOA violation notice, complete with her imperious signature at the bottom. The violation cited was visible storage of commercial equipment and unauthorized alteration of common area landscape, which I assumed referred to the snow on the street. "This is your first and only warning," she declared. "You have 24 hours to remove that plow from your truck and cease all unauthorized snow removal activities. If the equipment is still visible by tomorrow morning, you will be fined $500, and $500 for every day after that it remains." She paused for dramatic effect. "Don't test me, Jack. I will place a lien on your house so fast it'll make your head spin. We have standards in this community." And with that, she turned on her heel and marched back down my perfectly cleared walkway, leaving me standing in the doorway, the violation notice feeling like a declaration of war in my hand. I stood there for a long time after she left, the cold air seeping into the house. I read the violation notice again, half expecting it to be a joke. It wasn't. $500 a day. For what? For helping my neighbors? For owning a tool of my trade? The sheer, unmitigated gall of it was breathtaking. My first instinct was defiance. I wasn't taking the plow off my truck. It was a massive, heavy piece of equipment that took time and effort to mount and dismount. We were in the middle of winter. I might need it again at a moment's notice for a commercial client. To remove it because of Carol's petty power trip was absurd. So I did nothing. I folded up her notice, put it on the counter, and went about my day. I figured she was bluffing. No reasonable person, no board of directors, would actually enforce such a ridiculous fine under these circumstances. Surely one of the other board members would talk some sense into her. The next day, another notice was taped to my door. Second notice, fine of $500 assessed. The day after that, third notice, cumulative fine of $1,000. The letters started arriving via certified mail, forcing me to sign for them at the post office. Each one was a little stab of bureaucratic venom. Carol, meanwhile, had launched a campaign against me. I'd hear from other, friendlier neighbors that she was telling people I was a rogue operator, that I had damaged the roads, which was impossible, and that my actions were endangering the community by violating the HOA's insurance policies. She painted me as an arrogant rule breaker who thought he was above everyone else. Some people, the ones who were already afraid of her, started to avoid eye contact with me. They'd give me a tight, nervous little smile and hurry inside. The neighborhood I had just united with an act of service was being divided by her poison. It was frustrating and deeply insulting. A week later, a smaller storm blew through, dropping about 8 inches of snow. It was enough to be a major inconvenience, but not a full-blown emergency. This time, I did nothing. I cleared my own driveway and then sat back and watched. As promised, the HOA's preferred vendor showed up. It was a single pickup truck with a flimsy-looking plow, driven by a kid who looked like he was barely out of high school. He made a few sloppy passes down the main road, leaving a deep ridge of snow, a windrow, that blocked the end of every single driveway. He didn't touch the sidewalks or the walkways. Within 2 hours, he was gone. The job was, to put it mildly, pathetic. Later that morning, I saw Mr. Henderson outside with a shovel, trying feebly to chip away at the solid wall of packed snow and ice the plow had left at the end of his driveway. He was clearly exhausted, leaning heavily on the shovel between attempts. My conscience wouldn't let me just sit and watch. I grabbed my own shovel and went over. "Let me get that for you, Mr. Henderson," I said. He looked relieved. "Oh, Jack, thank you. I have a checkup with my cardiologist this afternoon, and I didn't think I was going to make it out." Together, we cleared the end of his drive in about 15 minutes of hard work. As I was walking back to my house, I saw a curtain twitch in Carol's window. Less than an hour later, another notice was taped to my door. This one was for unauthorized landscaping activities. Another $250 fine. It was then I knew this wasn't just about rules. This was a personal vendetta. The fines were piling up at an alarming rate. By my calculation, I was already on the hook for over $4,000. The next certified letter that arrived wasn't a fine notification. It was a notice of intent to file lien. That was the moment the ground shifted. This wasn't a game of nasty notes anymore. A lien on my property could affect my credit, my ability to get loans for my business, and could even lead to foreclosure if left unpaid. She was threatening my home and my livelihood. The anger that had been simmering inside me boiled over into cold, hard resolve. She had pushed me too far. I knew I couldn't fight this alone. I was a guy who moved dirt for a living. I didn't know the first thing about fighting a legal battle with a homeowners association. I asked around and got a recommendation for a lawyer named David Chen. His firm specialized in real estate and property law, with a particular focus on HOA disputes. The reviews online described him as a shark and relentless, which was exactly what I felt I needed. I walked into David's office with a thick folder containing every notice, every letter, every photograph I had taken. I laid it all out on his conference table. He was a man about my age, sharply dressed, with a calm, focused energy. He listened patiently for a full half hour as I recounted the entire story, from the big snowstorm to the shovel incident to the lien notice. He examined the documents one by one, his expression unreadable. When I was finished, he leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. "Well, Jack," he said, his voice even, "the good news is you're not crazy. This is one of the most egregious cases of HOA overreach I've ever seen." He paused. "The bad news is HOAs have an incredible amount of power. The covenants you sign when you buy a house are a contract, and courts are often reluctant to interfere with them unless there's a clear breach of fiduciary duty or a violation of the law." He explained that Carol, as president, was likely acting within the letter of the bylaws she herself had written, no matter how unreasonable they were. "So what do I do?" I asked, feeling a pit of dread in my stomach. "Just pay her thousands of dollars for shoveling snow?" "No," David said, a slight smile touching his lips. "We don't pay her, we fight her. But we don't fight her on her terms. Arguing about whether your plow is commercial equipment is a loser's game. We need to find a bigger lever. Petty tyrants like this, they always have a weakness. They get sloppy. They're so focused on the little rules that they break the big ones. His advice was to go on the offensive, but quietly. Start by digging, he said. As a homeowner, you have the right to inspect the HOA's financial records. Request everything: bank statements, contracts, invoices, meeting minutes. She'll probably try to stonewall you, but we can force the issue. We're looking for something that doesn't add up. A sweetheart deal with a vendor, a questionable expense, anything. He also told me to scrutinize the bylaws and the master deed of the subdivision. Read every single word. Look for inconsistencies, conflicts with state or local laws. You'd be surprised what you can find. I left his office feeling a renewed sense of purpose. I was no longer just a victim of Carol's whims. I was an investigator. The next day, I sent a formal, certified letter to the HOA board, legally drafted by David, requesting full access to all financial documents for the past 2 years. As expected, the response was a single sheet of paper from Carol, stating that the records could only be viewed by appointment at her home. I made an appointment. When I arrived, she presented me with a thin binder containing a high-level budget summary and nothing else. "These are the records," she said smugly. I knew this wasn't good enough. David drafted another letter, this one more forceful, citing the specific state statutes that guaranteed my right to see the source documents. While that battle was being waged through the mail, I took David's other piece of advice. I got a copy of the complete HOA covenants, conditions, and restrictions, or CC&Rs. It was a dense 80-page document full of legalese and mind-numbing clauses. I spent nights at my kitchen table with a highlighter and a legal pad, reading it line by line. I was looking for any mistake, any loophole. Most of it was the standard boilerplate, but the sections Carol had added were obvious. They were filled with subjective language like aesthetically pleasing and harmonious with the community. One of her favorite points of attack against me, even before the snowstorm, was the large shed in my backyard. I had built it about 5 years prior, long before her reign. It was a solid, well-built structure, about 12 by 20 feet, where I stored my lawn equipment and some tools for my business. According to one of Carol's new rules, accessory structures were limited to 100 square feet. She had sent me at least 3 notices about it, which I had largely ignored since the shed predated her rule. The lien notice she sent me mentioned the fines for the shed as part of the total amount I owed. It was clearly a sore spot for her. Driven by David's advice to check everything, I decided to pull the original permits for the shed from the county records office. I just wanted to have all my ducks in a row, to prove it was built legally and to code. I drove down to the county clerk's office, a dusty building filled with the smell of old paper. After about an hour of searching through microfilm and digital archives, the clerk helped me find the file for my property. I found the permit for the shed, the past inspections, everything just as I remembered. But then I saw something else, a document I had forgotten about. When I had the shed built, I hadn't just built a shed. Our part of the country is in a moderate tornado risk zone. It's not a weekly occurrence, but it happens. Having seen the devastation they can cause, I decided to over-engineer the structure. Instead of a simple wood frame on a slab, I had paid extra for the foundation to be deepened, the walls to be built from concrete blocks reinforced with rebar, and a heavy-duty FEMA-rated steel door to be installed. It wasn't just a place for my lawnmower, it was a storm shelter, capable of withstanding an EF2 tornado. And there it was, in the county file, a separate certification, a document signed and sealed by the county emergency management director, officially registering my structure as a private residential storm shelter. Attached to it was a copy of a state statute that I vaguely remembered my contractor mentioning at the time. I read it, and my heart began to pound. The statute was titled Encouragement of Emergency Preparedness. The language was crystal clear. To encourage citizens to build safe rooms and storm shelters, any structure officially registered as such with a county or state emergency agency was hereby exempt from any and all municipal zoning ordinances or private covenants, including those of a homeowners association, that would restrict its size, placement, or construction materials. I read it again, and a third time. A slow grin spread across my face. This was it. This was the silver bullet. This was the big lever David had been talking about. Every fine Carol had ever issued me for that shed, every threat she had made about it, was not just unreasonable, it was illegal. She hadn't just been overstepping her authority as an HOA president, she had been directly violating state law. The fines for the shed made up a significant portion of the total she was using to justify the lien. Her entire case against me was built on a foundation of illegal actions. I felt a surge of adrenaline, a feeling of pure, unadulterated vindication. I immediately made copies of the certification and the state statute. I practically floated out of the county clerk's office. I drove straight to David's office, without an appointment, and laid the documents on his desk. He read them, and the calm, professional demeanor he always maintained cracked. He broke into a wide grin. "Jack," he said, shaking his head in admiration. "This is it. This is the whole ballgame. This is better than finding financial irregularities. That stuff can be explained away, argued over. This is black and white. She broke the law. We've got her." Our entire strategy pivoted in that moment. We were no longer on the defensive, trying to fend off an unjust lien. We were now on the attack. David explained the new plan. "We don't just show this to her," he said. "That lets her off the hook. She'd just quietly drop the fines and move on to harassing someone else. No, we let her walk right into the trap. The HOA annual meeting is in 3 weeks. She's got your lien on the agenda. We let her present her case in front of the entire community. And then we lower the boom." The plan was simple and brutal. We would let Carol make her case for the lien, let her list all my supposed violations in a public forum. We would let her paint me as the villain in front of all our neighbors. Then, when she was at the peak of her self-righteous performance, I would take the floor. I wouldn't argue. I wouldn't yell. I would simply present the facts, the county certification and the state law. And then David, acting as my legal counsel, would explain the severe legal consequences of her actions. We weren't just going to get the fines dropped. We were going to discredit her so completely that her reign of terror would end that very night. For the next 3 weeks, I lived with this secret, watching Carol continue her petty campaign against me, all the while knowing that she was marching toward a cliff of her own making. The anticipation was excruciating, but the thought of the coming showdown was sweeter than any revenge I could have imagined. The night of the annual HOA meeting, the community center clubhouse was packed. In previous years, you'd be lucky to see a dozen people show up. Tonight, there must have been close to 100. Every seat was filled, and people were standing along the back and side walls. Word had clearly gotten out that this was going to be a showdown. The air was thick with tension and resentment. My fight with Carol had become a proxy war for everyone who had ever received a nitpicking fine or a condescending warning from her. They were here for the spectacle. They were here for a reckoning. I took a seat in the front row with David beside me. He had a sleek laptop and a small projector in his briefcase. I gave a few nervous nods to neighbors I knew. Mr. Henderson gave me a supportive thumbs up from across the room. Carol was at a long table at the front, flanked by the 2 other board members, a meek-looking man and a woman who seemed to worship the ground Carol walked on. Carol was in her element. She banged a small gavel to call the meeting to order, a smug, satisfied look on her face. She loved the power. She thrived on the attention. She went through the opening pleasantries, the budget report, the grounds committee update, with an air of bored efficiency. But you could tell she was eager to get to the main event. Finally, she arrived at new business. Her voice took on a grave, serious tone. "Now," she said, "we have to address a serious and unfortunate issue of non-compliance. As you all know, our covenants are in place to protect the value and harmony of our community. Most residents understand and respect this. However, one resident, Mr. Jack Turner, has repeatedly and flagrantly violated our community standards." A low murmur went through the crowd. She had their full attention. "Mr. Turner has been issued multiple warnings and fines for a range of violations, including the visible storage of commercial equipment and the construction of an oversized, non-compliant accessory structure. He has refused to pay these fines, which now total over $7,000. Therefore, the board has been left with no choice but to vote tonight on placing a lien against his property. She looked directly at me, her eyes cold and triumphant. This is not something we do lightly, but we cannot and will not allow one individual to undermine the rules that bind us all together. She asked if there was any discussion. This was our cue. I stood up. I'd like to address the board and my neighbors, I said, my voice as steady as I could make it. Carol smirked. You have 3 minutes, Mr. Turner. I walked to the front of the room, took the projector from David, and set it up. I don't think I'll need that long, I said, as I projected the first image onto the screen behind her. It was a copy of the HOA bylaw she had written, the one limiting accessory structures to 100 square feet. I highlighted the relevant line. This is the rule Carol is referring to regarding my shed, I explained calmly. Then I clicked to the next slide. And this, I said, my voice rising slightly, is a copy of Our State, Statute 28, Section 4A. I had highlighted the key passage in bright yellow. I read it aloud for the entire room to hear. Any structure officially registered as a private residential storm shelter with a county or state emergency agency is hereby exempt from any and all municipal zoning ordinances or private covenants that would restrict its size, placement, or construction materials. The room was dead silent. You could feel the collective intake of breath. Carol was on her feet. What is this? This is irrelevant. You have a shed, not a storm shelter, she sputtered, her face starting to flush. Is that so? I said, and clicked to the final slide. It was the document from the county clerk's office. A crisp, clear image of the official certificate with its gold seal and the bold letters across the top. Certificate of Registration, Private Residential Storm Shelter. My name and address were clearly visible. The signature of the county emergency director was at the bottom. The gasp from the audience was audible this time. I turned to face them. Every fine I have been issued related to my shed has been illegal. The primary basis for the $7,000 debt Carol claims I owe, and the lien she wants to put on my home, is based on her willful ignorance of state law. Carol was incandescent with rage. This is a trick. It's a forgery. That's a shed. I've seen it. It's just a shed, she shrieked, her voice cracking. It's where he keeps his lawnmower. Before I could respond, David stood up, his presence commanding the room's attention. My name is David Chen. I am Mr. Turner's legal counsel, he said, his voice calm but sharp as glass. The document you see on the screen is a certified public record. To suggest it is a forgery is libelous. Furthermore, for an HOA board to knowingly attempt to enforce its bylaws in direct violation of state law, and to use illegally levied fines as the basis for a property lien, constitutes not just a breach of fiduciary duty, but also malicious harassment and could be construed as attempted fraud. The 2 board members sitting next to Carol went pale. The man looked like he was about to be sick. Just then, Mr. Henderson stood up from his seat, his voice frail but clear. That woman, he said, pointing a trembling finger at Carol. Find this young man for shoveling my driveway so I could get to my heart doctor. She fined him for helping me. What she's doing isn't about rules, it's about cruelty. Suddenly, another person stood up. She fined me because my son's basketball hoop was an inch too close to the street. Then another. She made me dig up the rose bushes my wife planted before she passed away. The room erupted. The dam of fear had broken, and a flood of grievances poured out. Carol was banging her gavel, but the sound was lost in the chorus of angry voices. She was screaming, "Order! Order!" But no one was listening. Her authority had vanished in an instant, exposed as a hollow shell. She looked around wildly, her eyes darting from the angry faces to the damning evidence on the screen behind her. She saw no allies, no support. Realizing she was utterly defeated, she grabbed her purse and her binder, and with a final, choked sob of rage, she stormed out the side door and into the night. In the stunned silence that followed her exit, David stepped forward again. Given the clear evidence of malfeasance and illegal actions by this board under Carol's leadership, he announced, we are formally requesting the immediate resignation of the remaining board members. I should also inform you all that a comprehensive complaint, including the evidence presented tonight, has already been filed with the State Attorney General's office. The two remaining board members looked at each other, then at the crowd. Without another word, they both stood up, pushed their chairs in, and walked out, leaving the front table empty. The petty tyranny of Carol was over. The aftermath was swift and decisive. The State Attorney General's office launched a full investigation into the Willow Creek HOA. They didn't just look at my case, they subpoenaed all the financial records that Carol had tried so hard to hide. What they found was even worse than we had suspected. The preferred vendor for snow removal, the one whose contract I had supposedly interfered with, was a shell company owned by Carol's brother-in-law. The contract was awarded with no competing bids, and the price was nearly double the market rate. Carol had been receiving a 10% kickback on every invoice, paid in cash. It didn't stop there. They discovered she had been using the HOA's debit card for personal expenses, lavish dinners, salon appointments, new clothes. She had justified them in the ledger as community outreach meetings and board uniform expenses. The sheer audacity of it was stunning. She had been treating the HOA's coffers as her own personal slush fund, financing her lifestyle with the dues and the petty fines she collected from her neighbors. Faced with a mountain of irrefutable evidence, Carol was arrested and charged with multiple felonies, including embezzlement, wire fraud, and conspiracy. The local news ran a short segment on it, complete with her mugshot, her perfect blonde helmet slightly askew, her face a mask of disbelief. To avoid a lengthy and embarrassing trial, she accepted a plea bargain. She was sentenced to 5 years of probation, ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA, a sum totaling over $50,000, and was permanently barred from ever serving on any corporate or community board again. Her house went up for sale a month later. For my part, I was completely vindicated. All the fines against me were expunged from the record. The threat of the lien vanished. The newly formed interim HOA board, led by a reluctant but determined Mr. Henderson, held a special vote. They unanimously agreed to use HOA funds to reimburse me for every penny I had spent on David's legal fees. It was a gesture that meant more to me than the money itself. It was an acknowledgement of the fight I had taken on for all of them. Overnight, I went from being the neighborhood troublemaker to something of a local hero, a title I was deeply uncomfortable with. People would stop me on the street to shake my hand. Neighbors dropped off baked goods and bottles of wine at my door. They thanked me for standing up to her, for giving them their neighborhood back. I always just shrugged and said, I just wanted to be left alone. And it was true. I never set out to be a champion. I was just a guy who got pushed too far. With Carol gone, a profound sense of relief settled over Willow Creek. The interim board, with the help of David Chen, undertook a complete reformation of the HOA. They went through the bylaws with a fine-tooth comb, stripping out every single one of Carol's absurd, controlling rules. The new covenants were simple, based on common sense, and focused only on the essentials necessary to maintain the community's appearance and safety. The Architectural Review Committee was disbanded. The regulations on lawn gnomes and mailbox colors were tossed into the dustbin of history. The power of the HOA was intentionally and drastically curtailed. It was returned to its original purpose, to mow the grass at the entrance and otherwise stay out of people's lives. The community healed. The tension that had permeated the neighborhood for 2 years evaporated. People started talking to each other again, not in whispered complaints about Carol, but in friendly chats over the fence. The spirit of Willow Creek, the one I remembered from when I first moved in, was back. A few years have passed since the Great HOA War. Willow Creek is thriving. The neighborhood is more close-knit and friendly than ever before. It's as if surviving the ordeal together forged a stronger bond between us. Property values have actually increased, not because of draconian rules, but because it has gained a reputation as a wonderful, welcoming community with a functional, non-intrusive HOA. The story of Carol's downfall has become a local legend, a cautionary tale told to new residents about the dangers of petty tyranny. The new HOA board, after a proper election, kept Mr. Henderson on as a respected advisor. They put the neighborhood's service contracts, including landscaping and snow removal, out for a fair and transparent bidding process. My company submitted a bid for the snow removal contract. We didn't get any special treatment, but our bid was competitive and our reputation in the neighborhood was, shall we say, solid. We won the contract fair and square. Now, when a big storm hits, I clear the streets and driveways not as a vigilante, but as a trusted and paid contractor, which feels right. I only saw Carol one more time. It was about a year after her sentencing, in a grocery store in the next town over. I almost didn't recognize her. The helmet of blonde hair was gone, replaced by her natural gray, cut in a simple, unstyled way. She wasn't wearing a blazer, she was in a worn-out sweatshirt and jeans. She looked smaller, diminished, and tired. The arrogant fire in her eyes had been extinguished, leaving behind a hollow, defeated look. She saw me from across the produce aisle. For a moment, she looked like she was going to turn and run, but she didn't. She hesitated, then pushed her cart over to me. "Jack," she said, her voice quiet, almost a whisper. She wouldn't meet my eyes, focusing instead on a spot somewhere on my shirt. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. It wasn't a robust, heartfelt apology. She didn't apologize for the harassment, for the illegal fines, for the stress she had put me and the entire neighborhood through. She just said, I'm sorry for how it all turned out. It was a weak, self-pitying apology, the apology of someone who was sorry they got caught, not sorry for what they did. But I found that I didn't have any anger left for her. The rage had long since cooled into something closer to pity. Here was a woman who had been given a little bit of power and had let it consume her so completely that it destroyed her life. It's over, Carol, I said quietly. I hope you find some peace. I nodded and walked away. I never saw her again. Looking back on the whole ridiculous affair, it's hard not to see it as a lesson. It's a story about what happens when people are so obsessed with the letter of the law that they forget its spirit. Rules in a community are supposed to serve the people, not the other way around. When a rule stops people from helping an elderly neighbor in a snowstorm, it's not a good rule. It's also a story about the corrosive nature of unchecked power, even on the smallest scale. Carol wasn't a criminal mastermind. She was just a lonely, bitter person who found a tiny throne and decided to become a queen. And like so many tyrants, her own arrogance and her relentless persecution of those who wouldn't bow were the instruments of her own downfall. She built her own trap and walked right into it. Most importantly, though, it's a story about the strength of a community that decides it has had enough. For a long time, we all grumbled in private, but were too intimidated or too apathetic to do anything. We let her take control because it was easier than fighting. It took being pushed to the absolute brink, to the point of losing my home, to finally make a stand. But when I did, I found I wasn't standing alone. My neighbors were right there with me. Today, life in Willow Creek is quiet again. The drama is over. I'm back to being just Jack, the guy with the plow truck. I'm heading out now, actually. The forecast is calling for another big storm tonight. I've got my F-350 warmed up, the plow angled and ready. I'll clear the lots for my commercial clients, and then I'll come back and make sure the streets of my neighborhood are safe and clear before morning. I'm just a guy doing his job, serving his community. The peace has been restored. I'm being left alone, and it's perfect.